What do you know, man? It's been a while. Well, I
Yeah,
talked
it's
to you
been
all
a
the time.
while.
It's been a while
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. Well, I suppose life was tugging at us and, we had a lot of other commitments and we got pulled away from the podcast. But, I knew we would come back to it and, we're, I suppose, leveraging the clean slate effect. But it's something that we love doing. And, anytime we travel around speaking, people are always raving about the podcast. So I almost feel like we have a responsibility to sort of resurrect it or get it going again.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think it's when you're going through your professional career, obviously a lot of the people that listen to this are PTs and chiropractors and other healthcare pros. There's always new things that you can add to what you're doing. And there's lots of times where you maybe add a little bit too much and you need to edit things down, and trying to figure out what is the right mix of things to do, especially now when it seems like you need to be doing a million things. I think can be challenging. And, you and I talked a lot about the podcast over last year, and same thing. We always kind of said we need to come back to this and trying to orient your schedule and your life around working on the things you want to work on. That's why we're coming back to this. And we've got a new look. So the branding on this episode is different than the last episode. That's thanks to Nora, the designer that both you and I use. She's helped us with websites and lots of other things. So excited to have a little bit of a new look to what we're offering and a little bit different of a format kind of moving forward, and excited to chat about, our topics today and what we've been up to. So I think to start, like, what have you been up to the last few months? What's life been like for you?
Well, I've been completely unplugged the last 2 weeks, and you had commented on the Instagram post that I put up, which was actually my email responder to say, hey, look, if you're trying to get a hold of me, it's not looking good. And, I think that anyone who's a rehab professional, we sort of put everyone else's health and longevity almost ahead of ours. And I think it's very important to pull away or unplug to just almost rejuvenate a little bit. I was on the gas hardcore this past fall. I was teaching a lot. You and I did a couple speaking engagements, and I did some other ones, and it culminated with being back in New York City with 2 one-day crash courses. And going into that, my son had pneumonia. I came down with food poisoning, and then I had to fly to New York and be on the hook for 2 straight days. And anytime I go back there, it's chaos because I lived there for over a decade, and everyone wants to catch up, everyone wants to have drinks, and I'm not drinking, so it's like, just basically running myself ragged. So, I had to pull back.
Yeah,
And I feel good now. So
that's good.
anyways, what's been new with you?
Well, this similar to you. So we're recording this at the start of January. When I started my practice, so I think I've had my practice for about 7 or 8 years now. I always thought that it would be cool to take off a week at the end of the year. I really like the holidays. I've always liked that since I was a kid. And I remember when I worked for other people, and then when I opened my business, the holidays were always super stressful in the clinic. When you're in the insurance-based model, it tends to be super packed because people are having more surgeries or trying to get stuff done before their deductibles reset. And as a business owner, when you're not working, you're not seeing patients or coaching or training people, you're not making money. So every time you step away, there is a little bit of inherent stress with the fact that you're not doing that right now. And so when I first started my business, I thought, oh, it would be cool to do that. And this is the first year I was able to do that. So the last week, Christmas was on a Wednesday this year. But that whole week, I had a couple meetings on Zoom, but I didn't do anything else. I didn't go into the clinic. I really didn't work on a lot of work tasks. I spent time with my family. I exercised, read some books, those kind of things. And it was really, really nice. Now, I am very motivated now to work because I haven't worked as much in the last couple of weeks, but it was a cool experiment and something that I probably need to do another time during the year that doesn't revolve around a vacation. So it took me about 4 years to take a vacation when I opened my clinic. And this was the first time it was, I'm not going anywhere. Like you could be working, if I'm on the beach somewhere, I can't work. And so it was fun. And I like you said about your post, I thought it was really good. I think that, for PTs, we want to work with people. We want to help people. If you run a business or you think you're going to run a business at some point, the tendency to always be on is definitely there. And I think that can be a necessary skill or maybe personality trait to have at times, but it's also a good idea to step away when you can. And that's something that I've mostly learned from, stressing myself out over stupid stuff.
Yeah, and if you don't take that break, you end up basically, I don't know, you're just sort of tapped out. It's not too dissimilar from training, right? You have to plan these periods of rest and recovery because otherwise you're not going to adapt. And, that is a very tough thing, especially when you're a solopreneur or a small business, because like you said, if you're not seeing patients, generally you're not making money. Now, we have sort of other things that we dabble with that maybe insulates us a little bit more, which we didn't always have, but that gives me a little bit more, I don't know, not necessarily confidence, but justification, to say there's revenue still being generated. But yeah, and I think other people are unplugged this time of the year, so it's just a great time of the year to let off the gas. And like you said, you come back firing on all cylinders, and as opposed to just sort of ho humming through the day or your work week.
Yeah. Yeah. It's also why we schedule our courses the way we do. So if you look
Hmm.
at kind of a calendar year for probably both in you and I individually, but definitely on the things that we do together, it's not, everything is not all the time. When we've taught bones, tendons, weights, and whistles, we've taught that in person for the last 3 years, overall for the last 5 years, going back to during COVID. We don't teach that in the summer really. We also don't really teach it from, Thanksgiving to, through January. And some of that is because we don't want to be on the gas all the time, right? So you've got other things you're doing, you've got, things that are outside of work, or you just need a little bit of time from those kind of things. I think that's important to look at. I think you can look at that with patient care, if you're a coach, if you're coaching people, if you've got other services that you offer, trying to figure out what's the right rhythm to the year. Like you said, with training, it's very similar. I put a question up on Instagram last week about what are the biggest frustrations providers see when they treat runners. And one of the common things was getting them to rest, getting them to pause. And I've certainly seen that with a lot of patients where someone has a breakthrough performance or they have this really big goal and they achieve it, and then they want to just keep getting after it, and then they get hurt a few weeks later. So like if you're a runner and you're taking that approach where you're always on all the time, it's going to bite you at some point. If you're a business owner or you're just a motivated PT or chiro, if that's your approach, it's going to bite you at some point.
Yeah,
So
a thousand
you'll
percent.
figure it out, or it'll figure it out for you.
Anytime someone says, I just had the most epic race or performance or training session, I'm like, tomorrow is a day off. Like, you have
Pause.
to chill. Yeah, because if it is, it's such a challenging thing. I don't want to sit here and pretend I'm not guilty of that, but I've gotten better. And, I think for people to at least, one of the books I reread was Phil Maffetone's book. And there are some things that I think are a little bit reductionist, but I think that generally his message is spot on. And just little things like most people who have jobs, not to mention other responsibilities, they're on the gas, right? And the weekend is a time where they'll really stack workouts and try to perhaps do a little bit more. So, with a lot of the programming that I handle, I always say, Friday off for light, and same goes for Monday. You have to be very cognizant of what you're doing on the front and tail end. And yeah, people have a heck of a time doing that, and that's why oftentimes they don't end up seeing the results that they hope for. But that's such a challenging thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm working on a newsletter right now, and it's on the space between the stimulus and the response, because
Hmm.
that's something that you'll see in so many different realms. So when you look at the bone literature, it'll talk about, okay, you do this thing, you have this stimulus, exercise, lifting, whatever it is, and then you have a space, and then you have the response from the body. You can think about it if you and I were getting in an argument. So you sent me a book, Shane Parrish's book. So he talked about this at the start of it, where he said there's this space between basically if someone's mad at you and whatever your response is going to be. And what happens in that space can really dictate what the outcome of that's going to be, whether, you and I just end up yelling at each other or we work to some kind of conclusion. If you're exercising, is this going to be a helpful thing? Is it going to move you towards whatever specific goal you have? Or is it going to be a bad thing? You're going to get closer to injury, closer to burnout, whatever that is. And I think about that a lot with the people that I work with, and definitely for myself as well, is what's happening between whatever we're doing and whatever that response is going to be, whether we're talking physiologically or just our unique response to whatever's going on around us.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I don't think lifting right after a run is always the best idea, especially if someone has a history of bone stress injuries, right? Everyone's like, oh, you got to stack the hard days. And I'm like,
Yeah.
wait a second. Who are we dealing with? What's the stimulus we're going for? Because I would caution against that because you know better than anyone, bones are deaf to load at that point. So you're just probably putting someone further in the hole. Not to say there wouldn't be benefits for muscle, but even tendon, like you need to give someone 4 to 6 hours of reprieve ideally. So yeah, and I mean, you said, the time between stimulus and response, failure to acknowledge that could really throw your life sideways,
Mm-hmm.
because people are very like, they just have these snap responses or judgments. And it's like, yeah, just chill, sleep on it, just take a deep breath and you'll probably change what comes out of your mouth.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's just take some pressure out of the situation. Just pause for a second and then we'll move forward. But that's hard to do. That's hard for all of us to do. So no judgment if people have a hard time with that.
One of the things I wanted to say really quick is
Yeah.
there's a quote, there's a fellow named Kyle Johnson, and I think it's always important to give attribution when you learn or hear something that really sticks with you. He's a brilliant swim coach. He's worked with a few Olympians, and he always said, Chris, isn't it funny how the seasons periodize our training if we're really paying attention? And Phil Maffetone talks about the
Mm-hmm.
seasonality of training. I've come to appreciate that. And the athletes, I always wonder how people in California do it because they're just on the gas all year round and then they sort of stagnate. People probably think I'm talking about them as I make that statement. But yeah,
Sure.
the same goes for business, sport, life. It's like, if you can sort of live in harmony, not to sound like a hippie, but if you can live in harmony with the seasons, I think that bodes well for the body and mind.
Yeah. Cool. So today so we've got a new offering coming up, and we're not going to release much more on that today, but we do want to talk briefly about it. You and I have done a business mastermind for the last few years. So in the spring of each year, we have an offering where we take on a few clinicians who are either in the midst of going out to open up their own practice, or they currently do that, or they see that as something in their future, and trying to give them some skills that we have found helpful in our kind of journey through doing this. And so this year we've got a little bit different of an offering. And so if you'd like to learn more about that, you can check out the description or the show notes, and there's a landing page there and you can get more information. We'll be releasing a little bit more over the next few weeks. But if you're a healthcare provider, you're someone that sees themselves either going out on their own, or they just want to have a better sense of how to navigate their career, it's going to be a fun offering and a little bit different than a lot of the stuff out there, which is largely super, super expensive, or what you and I tend to feel like is not necessarily helpful information. So like I said, we'll talk more about that. But today we wanted to talk about kind of our thoughts on PTs or rehab professionals as independent contractors, viewing yourself in that way, even if you work for somebody else, and then go through some of the clinics that we've worked with or seen over the last few years and how they've been able to build cool practices kind of all across the country. So when I kind of say that as a PT, you should view yourself as an independent contractor, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think immediately to a situation where some friends of ours were recently let go. They were given a 1 month severance package. They're in real estate. They're in a different sector, but they had made the sacrifice. They moved from Seattle down to a small coastal town, and they were planning to, I think, settle down there, at least for the next maybe 5 to 10 years. And there was a change of ownership in terms of the company they were working with. The manager of this particular office, I think, didn't really get along with the husband of my wife's friend. So first of the year, second of the year, I think it was within the past couple of days, they got word that basically they're going to be let go,
Yeah.
and here they are, they have no plans. They're going to have to move back to Seattle. And I think that that's why it's so critical that you start, stacking skills that really, will make it so you're never out of a job, and you have the skill set that allows you to survive in the modern day. And I think the same thing goes for a lot of physical therapists and chiropractors is, you want to create a situation where, you're indispensable, right? And I think that way you can always branch out and become a solopreneur and do that very fast if the situation calls for it. And I also think you'll get to a point where you start realizing you're unemployable because you have these different skills and you learn to be very nimble and move quick and really infuse you into everything that you do. And I think that's something a lot of people are, maybe they start to do that later in life, but we don't have to run, you and I don't have to run things through HR or get approval. We just make a decision and move, right? Sometimes it's a good decision, sometimes it's a bad decision, in which case there's a lot of deep learnings. But yeah, and the world's moving so fast, but there's all these no code platforms and things that you can learn that will just, put you in a really unique position in this day and age.
Yeah.
I know I've seen you stack a bunch of skills. You and I have both acquired a bunch of skills that really allow us to channel our message to the people that we want to help.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not clinical stuff. I mean, obviously you want to be good at what you do, and often quoted, you want to keep the main thing. So Cal Newport talks about this in some of his books. The author, we've talked about him before, about kind of being so good they can't ignore you. That's one of the titles of one of his books, and figuring out how to be really good at the thing that you do. And so if you're a PT, it's PT. If you're a coach, it's a coach. Lifting, like whatever the main thing is, get really good at it. But also don't neglect working on other things. I know that the skill set that I had when I worked for other people was far different than what I do now. And when you open up your own business, you do have to learn a lot on the fly. I didn't learn any business stuff in school. I don't think you did either. It's all been, on the fly stuff. And so figuring out how to write, how to organize your schedule, how to make sure your bills get paid, like all of those kind of things can be really important. And that's one of the things that we cover in the new offering that we have, is trying to set yourself up for success, whether you're working for somebody else or you see yourself doing your own thing at some point. Because I know for me, I had already been established in the community that I'm in before I opened my practice. And that was a huge help to me because I wasn't starting from zero. I already had relationships. I already had clients that I worked with. And so that step was a lot easier probably than when you went from from New York to Seattle, where it's a whole new environment. And I think having some skills that you develop while you're working for other people, if you work for someone else, I think that's a great thing to do, because you don't know the moment something will be presented in front of you where you could go off and do something different. Yeah. And that's just something that, you and I have kind of learned through trial and error more than anything.
Yeah, and I think the point you made about learning skills outside of your immediate domain. Shane Parrish, I don't know if you've gotten to that section of the book yet, but he talks about when you really know your craft, you're also aware of certain weaknesses, but you know how to leverage your strengths.
Hmm.
And I think that's critical. And to also be careful about claiming to be an expert in things outside. It's like someone will say, if someone's like, "Oh, I'm a copy," I never tell people I'm a copywriter. Do I know how to write? Yeah, bet your ass I do. And do I know how to communicate complex ideas? Yeah, but I would never, offer my services as a copywriter because there are people who dance circles around me. So, but yeah, I think if you sort of stack some of these skills that are pretty easy to acquire, it's going to be a process. You're going to probably curse, get frustrated here and there, but that's when the learning's occurring. But And I think as you start to stack these skills, it just puts you in a very unique position.
So if you had to think of the three things outside of clinical care, so not you providing physical therapy or coaching, if we took both those off the table, what do you think the three skills that you have that have been the most beneficial to you in your career?
Yeah, hands down, number one is communication. And that's both in-person communication or oral as well as written. I think that writing is going to become a fleeting skill or ability. And people are going to be like, hey, do you remember when we used to actually write stuff? Because people are just relying on ChatGPT. But it comes across as sort of inauthentic. Like you and I both read stuff sometimes. And I'm like, hey, man, did you read that? Like, that's not from that person's mouth. Like that's
Yeah.
totally AI generated. And I think that creates a little bit of a disconnect. So I would say sort of motivational interviewing, transparent communication, and alliance, and then writing, I think is really important. So I would say those are sort of two subcategories under communication. I think being on camera and being nimble with video is also a huge skill. So understanding how to frame things, understanding lighting, and a lot of what's put me on the map is exercise demonstration.
Mm.
So I think that's really important. And I would say the third one, and there's probably some other ones that I'll think about after the podcast, but coming up with analogies and understanding how to draw parallels. So if you're explaining a concept that may be related to physical therapy, coaching, that you look outside of that domain or sector, right? Because I think that's gonna help people better grasp things because we know things on a very technical level. So I would say those are the main things. There's one other thing that just slipped my mind that I wanted to mention. I think storytelling. I
Hmm.
think, I, I was reflecting a lot about, my dad because he passed in April. He was just such an incredible storyteller, and that's what made him a good trial lawyer. Is that he would talk to jurors in a way that was just so convincing, but also relatable, right? And I think that's something that I hope to instill in my kids
Yeah.
that they learn to tell stories. And I think people try and come up with these very like extreme, complicated stories, and I think most stories don't need to be so grandiose, if you will.
Yeah.
More just about everyday things, right?
Yeah.
How about you?
Well, and I think the hard thing about those now is most of those take time to develop. Like if you're trying to be a good storyteller or you're figuring out the analogies that you're going to use in the clinic, that is something that you really have to do on your own. I still remember this. So Adrian Lowe he's a professor. He was a professor, I think. He's a physical therapist, and I've taken a bunch of courses from him earlier in my career. And he's this very charismatic PT who taught the spine class that I took in PT school. And I still remember he has great stories. And so I remember trying to use one of his stories to explain a concept to a patient early in my career and completely falling flat on my face. And it wasn't my story. Like
Yeah.
I hadn't sat with it, thought about it, figured out how to weave that into what I was doing. It was just, I wonder if I do this, if it's going to be helpful for this patient right now. And similar to going on the internet or using an AI model or something and saying, hey, give me the best analogies for this situation, you really have to figure out how that's going to work for you, just like with communication. And, the only thing I would add to what you already said is I've always been very comfortable in the sports environment. So I've been around sports training, sports facilities, those kind of things since I was a teenager in a lot of different roles, whether, early on when I was the athlete, but, turning into the strength coach, every clinic that I've been in has been very sports based. And I've always been around trainers. Always been around athletes, and I feel very comfortable in that environment. And I've met PTs over the years that they just aren't comfortable with that. Just like if you put me in a hospital, I'm not going to do well as an inpatient PT. because I don't have a lot of experience in that environment. It's different things, it's different problems. So I think getting exposure to the environments that you work with or want to work with, I think that's really important. And I was lucky to do that even before I was in PT school.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you've made incredible headway too, man. I always laugh when I think back. You and Joel, like Joel was a student at Joel Satgas for people who are unfamiliar when I say Joel. And I remember I think I was in Colorado getting ready to race. Maybe it was Ironman. Well, it was Ironman Boulder. And I think that's when you had reached out. You're like, hey, can I do some mentoring? Like, here we are.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, very, very much process driven. And it's fun to see how you've sort of taken video to really channel a lot of your messaging, because I think it's a very powerful medium. It allows you to communicate a lot of information in a clear and succinct and timely manner. And you and I both know people's attention span is basically like 10 seconds. Right?
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
and with any of this, with any content or anything else, I think there are some maybe rules to play by with different platforms. But at the end of the day, you want to work on the stuff that you find important or valuable, or you care about, or you're interested in. I think sometimes we focus so much on the numbers of what the reach, the all those kind of things, that you forget that if you're going to spend your time working on something, you should enjoy it. And it should reflect you. This is something I've learned a lot about over the last few years, especially since COVID. If you want to do long form video, if you want to have longer conversations, if you don't want to have stuff that's just in someone's face, very flashy, that's okay. Because if you try to fit something into somebody else's model, it's like me taking Adrian's story. It's not going to work. You want to make
mhm.
sure that it reflects you, because you're going to get a better result, and you're probably going to have more fun doing it. And we should enjoy this. You spend a lot of time trying to be a rehab professional, whatever role you fill. And so when you're doing it, if you're going to be willing to put yourself out there a little bit, you should enjoy it, because you're going to keep doing it then.
Yeah, for sure. I think with Instagram, I admittedly get frustrated with Instagram. I feel like it's turned into this competition, right? Where
Yeah,
everyone's like trying to outdo each other. And the folks who generally have the least knowledge or expertise on something also tend to resort to the flashiest approaches to putting their message out.
very true.
The only thing I honestly care about with Instagram is bookmarks. I want to look at how many people bookmark that content. And there's been 2 or 3 instances where the number of bookmarks has exceeded the number of likes. And I'm like, yes, I'm like monster success, because I
Yeah,
know that, again, it's value. I don't want someone to get a quick hit and be like, that was cool. I want them to say like, wow, I need to bookmark this because it's something I need to come back to.
yeah,
So, or that's a sign of my old age. It's probably the
yeah.
latter.
Probably the
Yeah.
latter. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's some skills that you want to develop, and regardless of whether you think you're going to own your own business at some point or not. You talked about, bones, tendons, weights, and whistles last year. So you and I had the chance to go teach at 4 different clinics in 2024, different parts of the country, and I thought it would be helpful to talk about what we saw in those clinics, and maybe our best guesses as to why those clinics have all been so successful in their own kind of different parts of the country. In 2024, we taught at Rehab to Perform, which was in Bethesda, Maryland, close to DC. We went to Adams Physical Therapy, which was in Novi, Michigan, really close to Detroit. Base Camp Physical Therapy in Flagstaff, and then Pro Sports, which is just down a little bit south from you in Gig Harbor. All kind of sports oriented clinics, or maybe even just kind of endurance focused clinics. When you think back to those 4 different places, 4 different parts of the country, what did you take away from maybe what had been successful for them in building their business? And then we'll contrast that with what most people get advised to do when you're trying to grow a business.
Yeah, straight away. I mean, all these folks, to the extent, they attempt to put this out there that we were aware of it, core values. I mean, all of them, I mean, Josh Funk, Rehab to Perform, uh, their core values are literally on the walls, right?
Yeah.
And I think that people are reminded anytime they have to make a tough decision that they're going to come back to, okay, I have this decision. Here are values, and the company values don't need to be identical to the person's individual core values, but a lot of the times these folks are probably going to work for a company because the company's values resonate with them. So I think that they were all clear on their core values. There also, even though there may have been some structure, there wasn't a hierarchy.
Yeah.
It wasn't people barking orders. So it was much more of a partnership, and all of them were very warm and inviting.
Hmm.
So I think of when we showed up to rehab to perform, they basically were like opening the doors for us. Same thing with Adams. I mean, at base camp, we went out and hung out on Friday night prior to the course. So these folks welcome us with open arms and really make us feel at home when we come to speak with them, which I think fires us up to deliver an unparalleled experience. And I think all these folks were determined to get better. They weren't there to get CEUs. I mean, obviously that's part of it, but they were there to refine their understanding and to learn from people who are also in the trenches or in the clinic like us, but who put a premium on staying on top of the literature. Yeah, I mean, those are the things that jumped out. And I think the experience that or the weekend was phenomenal. I mean, from our standpoint. So, anything I'm missing?
I think that, and then just they all were obviously very involved in their community. And that's been
Yeah,
something that we've seen, not just this year, but basically every clinic we've taught that course at, where there's like a leader or a group of leaders, a group of clinicians that they either race or they for endurance sports they're either racing or they're working with training groups or they're doing things in their community. They're going to run clubs, they're doing these different things, and that's stuff that is not, I think it's very hard to measure the direct impact of doing those things, but consistently being involved in the community that you want to work with. I think that's the best thing that you can do if you're trying to grow a practice. I mean, I think that's what was so helpful for me. I think it was the same thing for you when you've talked about New York, where developing relationships and being kind and empathetic to people in your community is that's the magic. It's not anything else. A lot of times I think clinicians, when they're trying to figure out how to run a business or if they should start to do their own thing, it's like, hey, do all these ads or, word your website in this way that's basically the same for every single clinic I've ever seen.
yeah,
It's very like formulaic, or you need to invest a bunch of money into certain things. And man, I think it's the exact opposite. I think you need to spend a bunch of time with the people you want to work with, and not in a salesy way. Just go learn about people and figure out how you can, connect with them. I think that's the whole thing. And some of that is figuring out how you can be in a position to be your best at this. So when we talk about core values, when we talk about scheduling, when you talk about, all the kind of different buckets of life, a lot of that I think as a provider is making sure that you can show up and be as effective as possible. But I think consistently showing up in your community is the most important thing, and making sure that when you find relationships that are valuable for you and in your community, you need to make sure that you're continuing to work on those things.
yeah. I mean, one of the things that, when we mentor people, we always say, figure out where the narrative of your business intersects with the narrative of the community. Because if you do that, you're going to be able to help a lot of people and you're never going to be out of work. I was thinking to, someone who had reached out to us who had relocated cross country, and they were saying, you know, even though they grew up in the state they relocated to, they're in a different part of the state now. It's sort of been slow out of the gates, and that's normal. I went through that going from New York to Seattle, but after speaking with this individual, I got the sense they weren't going out and really immersing themselves in their community and talking to people about who they are and what they do. And I think that's also really important. Is I know a lot of PTs are altruistic, and but I think when someone if you're in conversation, I'm not someone to ever ask like, hey, what do you do? Because anytime someone does that to me, I think they're trying to put me in this pretty little box. And
Yeah.
after people hang out with me for a while, they're like, I
Yeah.
never, like, I can't figure you out. I'm like, dude, you've hung out with me for 30 minutes. If you could figure me out, like, there's no depth to me.
Yeah.
But, all this to say, like, if you are running a business, immerse yourself in the community. Tell people, who you are, what you do, in, and sort of like in an appropriate time. But I always volunteer. People say, "Oh, do you run?" I'm like, "Yeah, running's a huge part of my life, personally and professionally." And this is something that I get the sense that you run, which is why you're asking me. Is if I can ever be a resource for you. I'm a licensed PT, and I don't want to go an ambulance chaser here, but if you
Yeah.
ever run amok, reach out to me, and I have tons of resources, and I'm in a good position to empower you. And I just sort of leave it at that, and then people find us online. So yeah, community, man, it's everything. I think I think we realize that after the pandemic too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not to
Definitely.
say that Facebook I mean, I know a lot of people have had success with Facebook ads, but you may end up with someone on your schedule that's really you're not going to jive with.
Yeah. I feel the
So
same way about SEO to an extent,
yeah,
where if I have people that find me from Google, it's almost always not as good of a fit as if I get a direct referral from someone.
yeah,
So if they say, "Hey, I found you online, I found you on Google," or, you're 10 minutes from where I live or where I work, and that's the extent of what they know about me or what they've heard about me, those are always not as good as someone that gets a direct referral to you. And so it's not to say that SEO doesn't matter, ads aren't helpful at times, but I think your best quality, the people that you're going to connect the most with are going to come from other people.
yeah, because that other person's going to be like, "Oh, you're dealing with a bone stress injury. I have the dude for you." Like
Yeah.
that's how it's prefaced. So
Yeah.
you've already enhanced expectations going into that to be like, "Hey, I saw, you wrote this post, and do you do physical therapy?" It's a totally
Yeah.
different dynamic out of the gates.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I don't do anything. I've set up SEO, and focused on it maybe a little bit when I was in New York, but I was just pumping out so much content that, if you type my name in online, it's going to give like the first 6, 7 pages. And especially now that Chris Johnson, the running back
I was
that used to
retired.
be yeah,
Yeah.
it's on now.
Yeah.
Cool. But yeah, those are all great clinics that we went to. And I think part of the reason that, a lot of these clinics reach out to us is I think, subconsciously we are aligned on core values probably to an extent. And there's something about the way we maybe conduct ourselves or operate that resonates with them. And yeah, so if you live in those areas, you're spoiled.
Check them out.
Rehab to Perform, I think they just opened another clinic, but Adams PT in Novi, Michigan,
Yeah.
they have another location or two. Pro Sports in Tacoma, a group of chiros run that, and then good buddies at Base Camp and Flagstaff, which it's going to be fun to see them grow and evolve over the next few years.
Yeah. Yeah. They're good guys.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, hopefully everybody finds this episode helpful. I'm excited for the new format and some of the new things that we've got coming up this year. If anybody has any questions or topics about, PT or business or anything like that, feel free to message Chris and myself. We're happy to, throw them into one of the episodes. And if you're interested in kind of upping your game as a solopreneur or just as a clinician that wants to have some skills that are outside of just providing patient care, check out the show notes. There'll be a link to the landing page I mentioned, and you can learn more information about what Chris and I have to offer this spring. And if you find this content helpful, we would love it if you gave us a review or shared it with a friend. That's how we will be able to keep doing this moving forward. So,
Cool. Well, I hope you're feeling better. I just saw right after you were telling me that you came down with a stomach bug that norovirus is on the rise.
yeah,
So
it's
yeah, I
that
don't know
time
if
of year,
that's what you
man.
got, but yeah, I took my son to the doc at the end of 2024, and I'm like, oh, he'll probably have a cold or sore throat, and they're like, your son has walking pneumonia. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm
Great.
like, that means I'm probably gonna get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But Anyways, well, we're stoked to have this podcast back up and running, and let us know if there's anything we can do to make it better or to be a resource for you all. We hope you're up to the start of a great 2025, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Yep. See ya.